I'm Marcel, and welcome to me screaming into the void, mostly about books. I'm doing Criminalist Challenge of reading what you own, and now I've come to the book Jack Karouck on the Road. So just to shortly explain what I'm doing here, I've had my husband pick out and then wrap them in newspaper, so I don't know which ones they are, from our bookshelf, and I am picking out one and reading them, and this time it was Jack Kerouac's book. So Jack Kerouac and On the Road is a book where, to me, the text is quite uninteresting. It's not bad. It's about Sal and his friend Dean, who is driving and traveling around and just living for the day to day and not wanting anything else but the opportunity to just live for the day to day. But what's interesting with this book, I think, is that is the subtext, and this book as an example of beat literature, which was quite interesting because Jack Kerouac, alongside with William Burroughs and Alex Ginsberg, which are the three main authors of the beat generation and the beat literature, are very popular with young men. That's when my husband read both Jack Karouck and a lot of the others. And so when I came and I talked to him with how much I actually enjoyed the book, he was a bit surprised because I am neither young nor a man. But then I explained that I'm not that interested in the text, but I really enjoyed it as an example of beat literature. So beat literature was a literature subgenre that developed after the Second World War. And I think that there is no single events that changed literature so much as the First and then the Second World War. You have such drastic changes within art in general, either it's literature, music, or theatre, or film. And we talked a bit about why that would be. Why is these two wars so humongous, and why is it these two wars compared to other humongous events? My theory was that these two wars happened after the introduction of subjectivity on a grand scale with the invention of psychology in the late 1800s. Now, what I mean with that is that before the sort of introduction of subjectivity, I, as a person, I have my thoughts, I have my feelings, ideas. I mean, people weren't just automatons before that. But being sort of expected to be introspective, being expected to think about what I think and feel about certain things, wasn't necessarily something that you did, especially not in a grand scale as sort of you did when you introduced the aspect of subjectivity. And that can explain why these two wars changed stuff, because you then had soldiers, especially during the Second World War, that came and had these horrible things happening to them. I mean, just look at what came out of Japan after the Second World War, because they had to not just sort of, here is a trauma, how do I live my life, but you really then had talk therapy. The way you dealt with trauma wasn't sort of just pushing it away, but was talking about it and thinking about it. How did that make me feel? And that makes sense that changed people. When trauma isn't sort of just something you survive, but you have to understand. My husband had some other theories, especially considering we talked a lot about the Second World War, but also regarding the First, and that is that these two wars had a huge impact when regarding industrialization. And what I mean with that is that in other wars and other events, in that sense, where things happened, you very often had people on people, either individually, for example, during other wars, where I am a soldier, I have a sword or another weapon and I attack another soldier. So it's one on one. Or you have, for example, aspects like a different kinds of revolution where you still have a group of people attacking a group of people. But what happened with the two wars and the industrial scale of it is that it suddenly wasn't people versus people. It was people versus machines. Again, just think about what happened in Japan and the things that came out of it. So that was sort of the two theories that we had in regard to that. I would really like to know what you think about, number one, if you agree that the Second World War and the First World War was such huge impacts on culture. And also, if you agree in any of our theories, if you have your theories of their own, why that would be. So, but going back to the book and the Beat Generation. So Beat literature, and what I found fascinating with it is that you, for example, had other cultural reactions to wars. For example, Dadaism. And Dadaism was focused on how the world isn't making sense anymore. So we might as well just walk around and say da 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 da, because it's nonsense. Everything is nonsense. But what the Beat generation then focused on was that, considering that any day might be our last, why worry about anything? Why sort of focus on anything? Why can't we just live our day-to-day life only focusing on the day-to-day? And that's sort of what I mean with this sort of a wanderlust that both Sal and Dean, to some part, sort of talk about when they sort of are just driving around from part to part, which does sort of mimic how Jack Kerouac lived his own life, just sort of wandering from place to place. And Jack Karouck calls this madness, this idea that I don't want to do anything with my life. I don't have any huge goals in my life. I just want to live today to day. And you feel that so much that despite him never talking about the war, but just even so, because I knew this was a Beat literature and I knew why it grew out of, you feel the Second World War in the subtext. It's almost pulsating with it. And that's what I thought sort of was different and almost refreshing in a way of how then the Beat generation was just wandering here to there, living their best life. This, of course, does, and they don't want anyone to harm them. They don't want to harm anyone else. Let's just live. Today, reading this book, I of course am then forced to wonder. I can understand it. I'm not saying I want to live the way these guys lived, but I can understand it. I can be fascinated by it, and I can really see the connection with. If not to mention, this came out in the 50s. an atomic bomb and everything regarding that. So if I can sort of die at any moment, why should I worry about anything? Why not just focus on the day to day? But of course, me as a modern reader do then sort of think about, okay, but what about tomorrow? One of the things that I thought about, not necessarily as a critique to the book, but just as sort of a reaction to the focus on the day to day that he presents, is all the children that are left in the wake, because they sleep around, they enjoy having sex and intercourse and all that good stuff, and they never talk bad about the women. They never sort of, there's no slut shaming whatsoever. But when you have sex, especially unprotected sex, children will occur, and they don't really care about that, and they don't really care about anything. And that, of course, does have consequences for other people. So I enjoyed those thoughts and feelings, not necessarily as a critique of how Sal and Dean are living their lives, but as a way of sort of thinking about the consequences of a life lived purely for the day-to-day, and what are the consequences of having this sort of take on the world. Because I do understand where it comes from, but I can also understand why people who meet Sal and Dean might be critical of it. Not because they're sort of spoiled sports. But as I sort of stated, all of this is in the subtext. All of this is things that you read between the lines. So if you, unless you are a young man, because apparently young men enjoy these books without thinking about the subtext, I would recommend you reading a bit about the beat literature and the purpose of this kind of writing, and considering it also non-fiction of November. I enjoyed very much reading this as a companion piece. This is The Beat Generation, James Campbell, and he, of course, in this book talks about Ginsberg and Kerouac and Burroughs. And it's very easy to follow description of the thoughts, ideas, and ideals that they are working with as a form of literature genre, including also pictures. So this is a picture of when William Burroughs shot his wife while or not while playing William Tell. Again, the consequences of this type of life. But this book is not critiquing the Beat Generation. It's trying to understand the Beat Generation. And that's also what I mean with, I'm not critiquing what Sal and Dean is doing in this book. I understand, because it's so clearly a reaction to the Second World War, I do understand why they want to live their life the way they are living their life. So to me, it's just interesting because of trying to understand the subjectivity that is occurring in these characters. So if you want to read this, I also recommend reading up on the Beat Generation. And now I need to pick my next book from my little jar. I know it's sort of a classic way of doing it, but it's also a way for me to not lose track of what books I have read. And I am now reading book 30, So give me a moment. This is book 30, and this is a Norwegian book, which is my mother tongue, and it's article by our friends the Chinese. And this this is one of my husband's book, and when I'm saying that, it's I mean, we are married, we own all of the books together, we take the consequences of the books together, but we are both avid readers, and so the first fight we had was, how do we merge our two humongous bookshelves to be an even more humongous bookshelf? So this is a book about Arve Kalvø, which is a comedian who apparently decided to eat at 158 Norwegian Chinese restaurants in Norway to do something. I don't know what that something would be. I can just read off the back. Arve Kalvø thinks of himself as a supporter of a multicultural society. Will he still do that after I've eaten at 158 Norwegian Chinese restaurants? I don't know, but I'll let you know when I've read the book. And thank you for listening to me screaming into the void.